In the absence of a conscious identity, we all become a victim of circumstance, a victim of conditioning, and a victim of comfort. If you can create a clear, compelling, and conscious identity, then you have the opportunity to live into it and do your very best to live that out.
This week's guest was once the head of former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's protection detail, just one of the many high-profile roles he held during an 18-year career with the Australian Federal Police. He sacrificed a lot over those years, including his mental health, leading to a major depressive disorder and a snowballing gambling addiction that cost him nearly $2 million, his career and almost his life as his secret unraveled. Let me introduce you to Gary Fahey, who'll help you unlock the strength in your struggle and the power in your own story.
It's hard to change. It's hard to make the sacrifices that are required. It's why it's important for people to really understand who they are and the things that they value, and using that as a blueprint for what you want to do with your life.
Gary, welcome to Share.
Steve, thanks for having me on, mate. It's a pleasure to be with you and have a conversation.
Yeah, can't wait to hear more about your story. And as I say, you meet people for a reason. And obviously a mutual friend of ours, I caught up at the gym the other day and she was telling me a story. And she said, "Oh, do you know Gary?" And I said, "No." She starts telling me some of your story. And I thought, I got to reach out to Gary because we've got a lot in common around mental health, men's mental health, and getting people to really kind of unlock the potential within them.
Yeah, well, I suppose depending on which way you look and how long you've got, there's quite a bit of a story there. There's a couple of ups and downs, a few deep downs, and thankfully, the last trajectory has been the ups. But it's a world that that needs a lot more conversation, and I appreciate a lot of the work that you do that I've seen, and a lot of the conversations that you're having, because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling, that don't realize other people are struggling, and they don't realize that there's a conversation going on about it. And I think this is very important. Not just for traditional means of support, but for those that are less likely to reach out for help as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, as you look through some of my my podcast episodes, sometimes it's the topics that aren't sexy or aren't kind of out there a lot, but they're conversations and they're kind of stories that need to be told. And there's a lot of insights that need to be unlocked so that if anyone's on their own journey struggling, they feel less alone and they feel empowered that, they can be inspired to kind of make their steps forward.
Yeah, look, a lot of the things that I've actually just come from working with somebody, and I start a lot of my talks or a lot of my sessions off with asking people to shift their perspective a little bit. And the reason I say that is because when I was struggling, I found it very easy to figure out reasons why somebody else's story wouldn't work for me, or somebody else's process wouldn't work for me. They didn't have my upbringing. They didn't have my scenario. They didn't have my problem. But what I actually found was all of the stories have something in it for me. And it might just be 1% from this person or 5% from that person. But if you can start to look at every conversation with the question of what can I get from this, or how can I take something out of this? And again, that's why all the podcast conversations are important. It's because no one person is going to have your experience, but a group of 20 might have enough that can, help you understand what you're going through, or help you move forward, not just if you're struggling, but even if you're successful and want to get better. There's always a different perspective to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go right back, Gary. Tell us your story. Give us a bit of a snapshot on where you've come from and where you are today.
Yeah, look, I suppose the interesting part of the story, or the sexy part of the story, that that it starts around about when I was early 20s. I joined the Australian Federal Police, and I spent 18 years with the Australian Federal Police. It was a great time. I was fortunate enough to be in very high performance, high pressure environments. By 2007, just when I was around 30, I ended up running the Prime Minister's close protection team. I worked on that for a little while. I ended up running the Commissioner's office as the executive officer. So I had a lot of interesting experiences through the Federal Police. Again, very high performance, really at the pointy end, I suppose, of some of the major events that have happened throughout Australia's policing history, at least the last 25 years. And, that was a great period of my life, except for the fact that for the last 10 years of that career, and probably the most successful part of the career, I was battling a major depressive disorder and a gambling addiction that ended up costing me $2 million. I made some silly mistakes with the work credit card. It cost me my career, cost me my reputation, certainly family and friends, and had me very seriously considering the value of my own life. And, I got to that point where I had really one choice to make, and it was to go down one path or another. And thankfully, I took myself off to get a little bit of help. And the last 8 years have really been a process of building a version of myself that I can be proud of. And the great thing about that is that at every stage, I get to see a new version and a new opportunity and a new future. And I'd like to say that as successful as I was from the outside looking in before, I am tenfold more successful now than I was then, purely because of the work that I've had to do, the work that I've done, and looking at life and the world from an internal perspective rather than an external.
Yeah, perfect. Gary, take me back to working with the AFP, obviously very high stakes, high pressure, high stress roles. Um, you know, like how did you, I suppose, what kind of mindset did you have to have daily in those kind of roles?
Yeah, I wrote a book about my experiences called Externally Bulletproof, Internally Brittle, which, I thought was quite reflective of my experiences. And, I suppose as a young man growing up in Western Sydney, as a young man growing up in the 80s, I suppose, in the early 90s, and then moving into an alpha dominated environment, I was probably built to be externally bulletproof. My whole persona was about showing up, getting the job done. We were highly trained, of course, but there wasn't a lot of conscious thought or practice going into what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I didn't think it was too special, to be fair. It was just what I did. I think that there was definitely a mindset and a focus and a discipline there that has been beneficial to me in my post AFP life and even going through the struggles. And that was the discipline of showing up, of seeing things through, of finding solutions to problems that other people may not be able to see. And there was a period of my life where that problem solving ability eluded me for one specific problem. But there's certainly been skills that I've been able to call on and go back to in this part of my life as well. But yeah, primarily, I suppose back then there was almost, I won't say it was a false bravado, but I didn't focus on any of the things that could go wrong, or any of the external noise. It was, how do I show up and be I wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the one who got the job done. And so I probably blocked out a hell of a lot of, internal noise or internal messaging or fear factor, because I had to be the guy.
Mm. And what were some of the most challenging aspects of working for the AFP?
Again, I find it difficult to say, because I really love my job, and it felt to me like a lot of it came naturally to me. I suppose the difficult part as a more mature person looking back was that there really was, and potentially is, I haven't been there for a while, but a very performance based attitude to the whole environment. It was about how well you could do your job. Some people believe it's about how many people have, what relationships that you had, and who you were friends with, and that sort of stuff. But ultimately you are defined by the work that you do. And, that becomes very problematic when you're, again, at the pointy end of performance, because how do you get better than the best job that you've done? How do you get more extreme than the most extreme environment that you've been in? And pretty soon, they become the things that start driving you, and you lose sight of yourself, I suppose. And, I think a lot of people in high performance environment almost live it's almost like they're pretending to be somebody, just to keep up that persona, or just to keep their, the external, external accolades coming. And that's, again, in hindsight, that's probably was probably the most difficult thing for me personally, through the experience.
Mm. And talk to me about, obviously, people in high pressure roles, in law enforcement, in military, in a lot of those industries and roles that have those very high performance, kind of cutthroat, very high stressful situations. Talk to me about the sacrifice on mental health.
Well, it gets put aside. It gets spoken about a lot, and I genuinely believe that people want to do better in that field. I do think they're not really sure how, and but it does get put to the side because there's inherent in us all is this belief that in order to be strong, I can't be weak, and we start to have this view or this vision that any expression of weakness indicates vulnerability, and vulnerability equals, being incapable of doing the job. Now, again, as somebody on this side of that life, I know that to be a complete falsehood. But it's a conditioning that probably starts, very young for a lot of people, and continues on. And so, the experience with mental health is primarily it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, then you've got a problem, you're out of the job. And so you mask it. If you start to feel off, people will mask it with drinking, they'll mask it with gambling. Some people will mask it with drugs, scrolling Netflix, eating bad foods, cheating on their partners, telling dirty jokes when they shouldn't be. There's a whole range of ways that people will mask from themselves, some of these, some of these, mental health issues, or feelings of not, living a fulfilled life, or not understanding who they are or their purpose. And, in isolated cases and in small ways, they don't become problematic. Unfortunately, in my case, it became quite problematic. And there's a few other examples where people have gone to extreme measures, in order to not feel that pain. Thankfully I got through the other side, but there really is a difficulty for the individual to understand, the mental health experiences that they're having.
Yeah. And when you talk about the mental health in those kind of positions, talk to me about what's the onboarding process from the AFP, and is it kind of not physically beat you out of it, but do they beat the vulnerability out of you?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I can only speak from my time, I suppose. And, it's, to me, it's not a conscious process, right? It's not like, the people say, right, we need these guys to be, or these guys and girls to be hardened and to put all their feelings aside. And, because in reality, we probably know that that's not the best version. I mean, the most elite of our, military soldiers, in Australia, the SAS, go through vulnerability practices with their own team, right? But the rest of the military doesn't really, right? And that should probably tell you something that, if the most elite people are doing it and are comfortable with it, then it probably should be something that we should look at. But in a general sense, again, it's not. I wouldn't suggest it's a conscious practice. It just becomes a learned experience. It becomes cultural that if somebody speaks up with a problem, a mental health problem, and they get, sidelined, or potentially bullied, or made fun of, or someone just says to them, "Oh, come on, toughen up, buttercup," or in my day, it was take a spoonful of cement and harden up. Eventually those small things create a culture whereby, not only do you not feel comfortable to speak up, you don't even feel comfortable to have the feelings yourself. And so it's not that you're not telling anybody else, you're actually masking it from yourself. I spent 10 years with a major depressive disorder, and I reckon it took me at least 7 before I stopped, pardon my language, before I stopped bullshitting myself that this would all go away when I had a holiday, or this would all go away when I got a promotion, or this would all go away when I bought the next house, right? Like it probably took me 7 or 8 years before I started going, hang on a minute, there's something to this thing. And then it took me another couple of years to try and figure out what to do about it. By then I was already in a world of hurt. But I think that
the cultural experience is not intentional, but it has just occurred over, it's like turning around the Queen Mary. It's something that started probably in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and just kept perpetuating, to where we are today. And hopefully those conversations are changing, and not only the conversations, but the actions.
Yeah. And you talk about your experience as an AFP in the AFP security detail. Obviously, you said back in 2007, you were on Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's detail. Talk to me about, what do you think people most misunderstand or don't know about people that are in those high positions, like prime ministers, people in very high positions? You know, there's a lot of talk, I suppose, around, oh God, they get paid $500,000 a year and they get all these perks and everything like that. But what do you think most people misunderstand about high performance people, such as prime ministers?
For a great deal of them, there is very often no off switch. And there are elements of the life that I'm sure people envy, and people would love to enjoy, and get the perks and want to be on the front cover. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete or a high profile businessman. But there's a good saying I heard once that um, you know people want to be the noun, they don't want to do the verb. And everybody looks from the outside in, and they see the great experiences, and they see the front cover of the magazine, and they see the big pay packet. And I don't think they realize what it actually takes to get there. Um, I'm sure there are some occasions where what it takes to get there, aren't very good stories. But by and large, the high performers that I've worked with, in my career, and that I've worked with since, certainly this post AFP career, I don't think people understand what it takes to genuinely get there and stay there. Getting there sometimes can be done by talent, but it's very hard to turn it off if you're at such a level where your whole persona is built around the performance that you do. And I think Elon Musk has said, you don't want to be inside his head. People want his life, I presume. People want his money. People want the ability to be able to do whatever they want and buy Twitter and call it X. But what they don't realize is what the whole 24/7 experience is like. And is it worth it? To some people, yes. And I think to some people, it probably isn't.
Yeah. And a lot of people coming out of those positions, like prime ministers, like sports people, like people in very high, I suppose, high visual, celebrity, famous, people that are very well known. Um, Obviously, when those positions stop, whether it's an Olympian who's been competing at a high level for so long, whether it's someone in the military, whether it's someone that's worked at the AFP, talk to me about the process you had to go through to, yeah, I suppose, uncover your real identity, because obviously for many years you had an identity that was attached to a job.
Well, I was fortunate. I was fortunate that I had depression for 10 years and a $2 million gambling addiction that cost me my career, because I was forced to go through this process of looking at my identity. Um, Unfortunately, for people who just retire, or leave their sport because they get to an age where they can't play it at that level anymore, or they leave business, or they leave the military, um, there's really no warning or no indication that that process is necessary. There is a misguided belief that once I leave here, I can just go and sit on the beach for the rest of my life, and I'll be happy, or something will pop up. Um, the real problem is that most of us in life have attached who we are to what we do. And it doesn't matter whether it's your career, it doesn't matter whether it's your family. There's a lot of people that are married with two kids that have attached their identity to being married with two kids. And if they start to experience perhaps discussions of divorce, they go through the same problem as someone who's been in the military for 10 years and decides to leave, right? Like, that's no longer my identity. I don't know who I am. And the reality is that what we do is never who we are, but it gets inculcated from a very young age. When I meet you, at a cocktail function, we ask, "What's your name and what do you do?" And so we inherently attach
who we are to what we do, to such a point that we almost forget that there are other elements of our life that are required to make us successful, or that are required to live a fulfilled and purposeful life. And that's what happens when people leave a very strong identity-based culture, right? The police is one. We are part of a brotherhood. That is creating an identity. The military is one. If you're an elite athlete, that is another place where, your identity is basically handed to you. This is who you are. You get told, this is who you are. And that can cause problems for people in particular when they're leaving. But it can actually cause problems for them while they're inside as well. They are different people to their partners. Yeah, they can get very distant. They can find maladaptive coping strategies. And so it's a process that that all people should go through. But in particular, if you're in an environment where your identity is very heavily attached to the thing that you do, it would be my advice that you start considering who you are and how what you do fits into that, rather than what you're doing being the total sum of your identity.
So, Gary, talk to me about some of the questions that you went through over that time with depression and obviously your gambling issues. Now, can I first ask, did you consciously know that you were gambling and what you were doing was wrong?
At times, I think what I've learned since about the human brain, the mind, is that it's very good at creating a story to convince itself that what it's doing is okay. The story I use a lot is, most people can understand the experience of dealing with a 3-year-old who wants ice cream at dinner time, right? And if you're dealing with that 3-year-old and trying to have a rational conversation with them, there's no amount of rationalization that is going to stop that child from screaming and wanting ice cream, right? Because at that moment in time, the 3-year-old is irrational. And that's kind of the same as the human brain as an adult when the emotional brain gets triggered. And so there was definitely times in my life where I was not emotional and more rational, that I understood that my gambling was a problem. However, whatever the trigger was, and once you become triggered, or once the emotion started to get high enough that gambling became the only option to turn off the noise, good luck trying to convince me that it was a problem. I would lie to myself about the use of money and where I would get it from and how I would use it, because I didn't want to believe in those moments that I was doing anything wrong. I know that they were lies. I probably knew at the time that they were lies, but when you are in such a state of irrationality, it becomes implausible to you that you're doing anything wrong. It is literally survival mode. And you will justify anything that you have to. I'll steal a loaf of bread from my family because we've got no food, is kind of the lies that your brain tells you. This gambling act is more important than, your integrity. And therefore you need to breach your integrity in order to, fuel this gambling behavior. And so, the answer to your question is, did I know? Yes. Did I have the capability of consciously being aware of it when I needed to and doing the work at the right times? Not for a long time. No.
Hmm. So talk to me about your rock bottom when it all kind of all unraveled.
Yeah, look, I've got a theory about rock bottom, and that is that it really doesn't exist, because no matter what your environment, it potentially can always get worse, I suppose, except for, one real occasion. But, because my rock bottom could have been made worse if I'd lost an arm, right? Then I would have been even lower. But, I suppose in reality, rock bottom becomes, as J.K. Rowling said, the foundation on which you build your success, right? So that moment that is your bottom, that you decide to turn it around, doesn't necessarily have to be the rock bottom. At any stage, people can decide to turn it. But, I'd made some stupid mistakes with my work credit card, and eventually, after about 18 months, I got called into the deputy commissioner's office to try and explain the unexplainable, I suppose. And then I had to go through a process of leaving work. I had to go through criminal procedures. And that was a long period of time. And to be fair, probably should have been the rock bottom for me. And I went about 6 months without gambling after that, that smack in the face, I suppose.
what I hadn't done, what I did was I tried to work on my gambling, but I hadn't tried to work on the root cause of the problem, which was, again, it was me, it was, my identity, my purpose or not living it. And eventually after some time, you convince yourself that, oh, you don't have the problem anymore. You can have one bet turns into two or three. And, um, so some 6 months after this smack in the face, I'm back gambling again, and I'm gambling money I don't have, and I'm borrowing, and we're talking about a guy who should be smarter than this, right? Who has lived a life of discipline, who's lived a life of integrity. But for this one thing, I didn't have the capability of being the guy I needed to be at that time. And anyway, the stuff that was going on with work had a lull for quite a long period, and maybe I convinced myself that it was going nowhere. And eventually, it appears as though the story got leaked to the media. And I wasn't necessarily high profile, but I suppose the roles that I had were high profile enough that it made a story, and story got put in the paper, flashed on the screens, and here was me back gambling again. And now they'd realized that I'd moved states. They'd identified where I was living, not my actual address, but like the local area. And I was trying to start a new life with new people and new friends. And it got to the point where, I'm still gambling, and I kind of said to myself, I've tried to stop this thing a number of times, and probably 4 times in the 10-year period, I'd gone 6 months or so without gambling. Like, I'd worked on it, I'd gone to seek help. And I thought to myself at this particular point in time, I've tried everything that I could. This is the thought that I had. And here I am back gambling again, still hurting my family, still hurting my friends, still hurting myself. And if I haven't been able to solve the problem by now, I just don't believe that I can solve the problem. And therefore, it's probably in everybody's best interest that I'm not here anymore. If we want to talk about a rock bottom, that is probably as close as I was going to get, because the next step was literally, I suppose, rock bottom. It was it. I wasn't going to be here anymore. And that was the moment that really scared me, when I started to research, different things about that practice. That's the time where I started to get really scared, I suppose, that the next step for me wasn't going to be one that I was going to be able to come back from. And, so I made a promise to myself at that point that I'd go and talk to some people, and I would do whatever they said, whether I believed it, agreed with it, thought it was good for me or not. Clearly what I was doing wasn't working. So I figured that I'd go and speak to some people. And, that was probably my rock bottom moment. And, things didn't automatically get better the next day, but it was definitely a very slight and small uptick that thankfully over the last 8 or 9 years has continued on the same way.
Mm, mm. So talk to me, how did you claw yourself back? You obviously reached out to a doctor.
Yeah, the first step I made was to a doctor. I'd been to psychologists in recent history from that, like within 6 months. And, I tried a couple of different psychologists that I didn't really gel with or have a good relationship. But, these thoughts of no longer being here were real scary. So I went to the doctor. I went to a GP, and I just said, look, I need some help. I need to go somewhere. And doctor sent me to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was very helpful. I re-engaged with a new psychologist, very helpful. I was going to a gambling help program at the same time. There was some one-on-one counseling as well as some group stuff, which was very helpful. But and again, my resolution with myself was, I will just do what these people tell me to do, whatever was in my capability. It wasn't yet within my capability to stop gambling, unfortunately. But I was still turning up to the meetings. I took the medication when the psychiatrist recommended it. I'd always been anti-medication, but again, my answers weren't working. So I decided to, follow along with, whatever the professionals were advising me to do. And, I kept going, and probably a little interlude there that, can help people that are struggling and going to meetings. I was going to gambling meetings for 9 months and leaving those meetings and still gambling. And the reason I say that is because I know a lot of people that go to get help, and they're still doing the thing that they don't want to be doing, and they start to feel like they're a failure. So there's no point going to the meetings. Um, but what I've since come to learn about myself and about everybody probably is that by going to the meetings, I was signaling to myself the type of person I wanted to become. Right. And I got into trouble from 10 years of doing something I didn't want to be doing. I can't expect to go to 1 or 2 or 5 meetings and think that that whole 10 years is going to turn around. So I just promised myself that I was going to keep going, irrespective of whether I gambled after it or not. And eventually I got to this point where I changed from being a guy who wanted to stop gambling, who became a guy who was actively doing things to stop gambling. And then I became a guy who was getting tired of gambling. And I actually just had the conversation earlier today that I just got to the point where I was tired of doing the thing that I was doing. And I think that came because over that 9-month period, I didn't just go to the psychiatrist. I didn't just go to the psychologist. I didn't just go to gambling help. I did my own research on habit formation and high performers who struggle, and neuroscience and psychology and how does the brain work and how did I get here? And I actually started to build my own systems and practices that went in alignment with what the psychiatrist was doing and what the psychologist was doing and what the gambling help was doing. It's not a one size fits all, this process. It's, if you want to move from where you are now to where you want to be, irrespective of whether you're at rock bottom or on the edge of greatness, it's a series of things that you have to do. There's not one pill that you take that fixes everything. You might have to take the pill, but you've got to do the work as well. And you've got to see the coach, and you've got to go to the mentor, and you've got to turn up to your sessions. It's an all-in type of environment.
Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode.
So what would be your advice for, say, current AFP officers, people in the military, people in those high-end kind of roles? What would be your advice in regards to them maintaining their mental health and their wellness?
Yeah, I think the first part is, it's certainly in my journey, it's brutal honesty. You just got to be honest with yourself, right? Whether if you're not feeling as good as you think you could, right? You've got to find a moment where you can be honest with yourself, and maybe you need to find somebody to talk to that can help you be honest with yourself, whether that's a close friend, a partner, a specialist, a coach. It doesn't really matter. Some random in the street that you just ask questions of, and so I think you have to find some way to be honest with yourself that nobody in life is at their absolute peak at any particular stage, right? So stop pretending like you're the best that you are, that you're going to be. There are always ways that we can improve. And, subsequently, what I've learned, having worked with high performers, again, over the last 5 years on their mental strength, on their mental conditioning, is that even at the pointy end of performance, at the high end of performance, it's not your talent that separates you from somebody else. It is actually the mental conditioning and the understanding and the self-awareness and finding ways to, control your mind in a conscious manner, not by putting something in a box and never opening it, but by understanding where those emotions fit, where they're best served. And quite honestly, the best people in every single field are very self-aware. They're very cognizant of their vulnerabilities. They're very open about them, because it's those areas that actually help them get better. This is not especially in my business, I suppose, it's not mental health for mental health's sake. If you're a high performer, it's actually mental strength to improve your performance, right? This is a performance enhancer, right? If you're not capable of acknowledging that it's a mental health issue, then, use it as a performance enhancer,
right? Whatever story you've got to tell yourself, I don't mind, but this is absolutely a performance enhancer. And so, if you start viewing it that way, you might be more open to have these conversations, about how you can get better.
Yeah. I think a lot of the conversations I'm having, especially with men at the moment, is that they're really struggling, right? They're burnt out. They've got so much pressure and stress, expectation. They are literally at their wits' end, right? And there's almost, I think, in this world, in a lot of things, there's a lot of separations, divorces, relationship breakdowns. I was talking to someone yesterday and saying it's like there's an earthquake tremor that's kind of going through society at the moment. And it's sad to see the way some of it is going. But I also think that there's an opportunity here where we're sharing these stories. And I'm very passionate as a mental health first aid instructor to tell more of these stories, to unlock a lot more of these things, remove the stigma, raise the awareness, and also raise the knowledge around that there is support, that when you're going through something, you're not alone.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And again, especially in, the fields that I work in particular, either men's mental health or high performance, mental strength, mental health, or high performers that have, hit some hurdles. I think it's more important sometimes in those fields because, you know, the the conditioning that we have built over 100 years is that, for some reason those people don't need help or don't deserve help, right? Or that they have the capability or the finances or the resources to be able to get their own help, so we don't have to worry about them. Or, who are they to complain? They've had it too easy, or they've got a good life, so they shouldn't be whinging about it. What we do know, it's irrelevant how much money you've got and how successful you are as to whether or not you're going to have an issue with mental health. In fact, it's sometimes, more apparent, these mental health issues, and more extreme, probably, the way that people get themselves out of their mental health issues or try to avoid their mental health issues, the higher performer they are, because it's very difficult for somebody who has conditioned themselves to be a problem solver to actually turn up on someone's door and say, "Hey, I've got a problem." And a lot of the work that I try to do is to, help people bridge the gap, because there's also not a lot of strong language, masculine language or alpha language, around mental health, right? Mental health has been an area for a number of years or a number of decades that has been dominated by a softer side, which is fine and it's great. And there is absolutely a place for that. And it's been very helpful for a hell of a lot of people. But when I was going through my struggles, it was very difficult to find somebody, or find a voice that I could resonate with. And so, you know, whether or not I should have been able to resonate with a different voice, yeah, that's not the question. Simple fact was I couldn't resonate with any other voices. And I think that's where it's important that, we're now starting to get some, stronger voices in this field. Some people that are capable of standing up and saying, "I've struggled," or some stronger voices that are working in the field, because this is not unique, to one person or one type of person or one area of life. Every single person will go through some struggles at some stage. And there is no successful person on the planet that has got there themselves. So I really don't see the difference for people. If you're a high performer or you're an alpha, personality type, nobody gets to the top by themselves. It just doesn't happen, right? In any way, shape, or form. And this is just another string to your bow. And I probably, just to, tie a knot in that, what I'd like to say to men in particular, I suppose, especially men that think, that they are the tough ones, right? The strong ones, right? Like this tends to be the persona that I'm strong enough. I don't need that help, right? The thing that I would put to those men out there is that if you think you are tough, then do the tough thing. And the tough thing is to actually speak up. I would challenge men to do the tough thing. If we think that we're tough, if we think that we're strong, we know the tough thing to do is to speak up. And the reason we know it's the tough thing to do is because people don't do it, right? If it was easy, everyone would do it. And so, again,
my challenge to men in particular, but to, to high performers out there, that, do the tough thing, right? If you think you're tough, do the tough thing, and then just see where it goes, and you'll pretty quickly find that there are other people that are sharing your experience. There are other people that are willing to support you. And in fact, what I've found is that the more vulnerable that I've been, the actual more people will come out to try and support you, right? You actually get not just more help, and it's not just help with your mental health struggles. The more vulnerable I've been, the more people want to help me with my business. The more people want to help me with my fitness. The more people want to help me with almost everything in life, right? Because the reality is, the more vulnerable you become, the more authentic you are. And people want to deal with authentic people. Then you get a chance to really build the identity that you want for your life, the purpose that you want for your life. And you find that the opportunities just tend to show up because you're now being the person that you were put here to be. And, it's a great place to be, but it starts with doing the tough thing.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is, we were talking in a mental health first aid course the other day, and I was actually caught up with a friend for lunch yesterday, and we were talking about how those that have their kind of black swan events, they have their kind of rock bottom, they go through these struggles, right? It actually forces them to self-reflect and be more aware of themselves and more aware of what they do, how they act, what they say, what they want to do. And it's actually, even though it's tough crap that you've got to go through, right? It's a real struggle. The people that go through there actually can come out of there so much more empowered. And I always say, you touch on vulnerability there. I always say vulnerability is a superpower. I think vulnerability actually, I always find that if you come out and say to someone, and you share and you're open and honest and, as you say, authentic, it actually lifts a weight that a lot of us carry on our shoulders, because you're not hiding anything. You are who you are. And then if you show who you are, the people in your environment and the people that you attract are the people that relate to you and that are actually happy to, kind of be around you and support you, and interact with you because they love who you are.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I think that, again, what people don't realize is most people would like to suggest that they're honest. Most people would like to say that they have a life of integrity, but in the absence of vulnerability, I'm not sure that you can be honest, right? And again, I'm not even just talking about vulnerability with somebody else. Most people struggle to be vulnerable with themselves, right? Like, people don't generally tell lies to other people. They tell lies to themselves and just repeat them out loud, right? And if you're somebody who prides yourself on your honesty, on your brutal honesty, on your integrity, I'm not entirely sure how you could do that if you don't also engage in vulnerability, because it's dishonest, right? It's dishonest to present as a person who you are not. It's dishonest to pretend that you're going okay when you're not. Now, I'm not suggesting that, that you're a bad person, right? Because there are mechanisms that go on inside our own brain that try and protect us from pain. And, I've said often that nobody wants to be responsible for their own pain. And that's why they lie to themselves about whose fault it is when they're, when they lose a job or when they're overweight or when they have a gambling addiction, right? We all try and lie to ourselves because we don't want the problem to be us. We want it to be somebody or something else.
The hardest place to look is in the mirror, Gary.
Absolutely. I think that, again, that the challenge is out there that, if you want to be the best version of yourself and that person is honest, then it's time to be honest, right? Like you don't get to be the noun without doing the verb, right? You can't go around pretending to be honest if you're not honest. The great thing about vulnerability is that it does get you to the other side, and the other side has a lot more success involved with it. Sustainable success, success where you bring other people along with you as well. If you're able to work on or be open about some of the struggles, because nobody is really made by their good efforts. They're all made by the struggles that they've had and how they've overcome them. And whether you've been forced to look inwards or you've been able to make the conscious choice to look inwards, a fulfilling and purposeful life, eh, you know, you know, somebody having self-respect, um, you can only have self-respect if you do things that you yourself respect, right?
Mm.
You can only have self-confidence if you do things that you yourself, value and provide you confidence, right? All of the words self-esteem, you can only have self-esteem if you yourself are doing the things that provide you that level of confidence and esteem in yourself. And they are all internal factors. None of those are external factors. Self-respect is not an external thing. Self-esteem is not an external thing. Self-confident, the answer is in the word itself.
Mm.
And therefore, if you want that life, if you want to stop being a 5 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10, and you don't want to live your life saying, oh, well, it could be worse, then it behooves you to actually um, start to be honest. First of all, with yourself, and then if it fits, with somebody else, so that you
Mm.
can build your team, you can garner support, you can find skills that you don't have. I mean, none of us have all the skills, right? Again, there is no world-class athlete that doesn't have a coach, that doesn't have a fitness trainer, that doesn't have a sports psychologist, that doesn't have a nutritionist. I heard a story that LeBron James spends $2 million of his own money on his support team, let alone what he gets at the Lakers, right? The people that are the best understand this. Um, it's the people that want to be the best but don't know how to confront their own vulnerabilities that struggle along the way.
Yeah. Gary, talk to me, coming through the journey that you've come through. What are your daily habits now to ensure you stay on track and, achieve that success for what it is for you?
Um, Look, I want to preface this by saying my belief is that the habit itself is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether it's mindfulness, breath work, meditation, drinking water, stretching, exercise, reading books, journaling. The exercise or the practice itself is irrelevant, providing the exercise itself is a positive one, I suppose. It's not irrelevant if you're drinking or gambling or taking drugs, right? But if the exercise itself is a positive one, I think the exercise or the routine itself is technically irrelevant. The two things that are most relevant to me in my practices are a priming exercise in the morning. I have a very clear understanding of who I am and who I want to be as a person. And my responsibility is to ask myself, how will that guy show up today? Right? Take every opportunity to allow that guy to show up, the best version of me or the identity that I've created for myself. And is to keep the promises to myself. So if my promise is to have a cold shower in the morning, it's irrelevant whether the cold shower works or doesn't. I made the promise, I do the thing. If I promise not to hit snooze on the alarm, I made the promise, I do the thing, right? Self-confidence is nothing more than keeping promises to yourself. And so what I would say to people is the practice itself is irrelevant. It's keeping the promise that makes the difference. And you find things that you can do. You find what you want to find is something that is big enough to move the needle, but small enough that you will do every day. And if you find that practice, that is probably the greatest path to success on the back of doing some work to understand who you are when your emotions can't get in the way.
Yeah. Gary, I talk about in my courses and with people, even on the podcast here, I always talk about the power that I found in journaling. Did you do a lot of journaling through your process?
I've done a lot of journaling. I mean, primarily my book was probably my journal. It took me 4 years to write it, but ultimately I wrote it in 4 months, but it was basically 4 years of notes, I suppose. And and I found the process quite cathartic, and I found that it changed over time. It changed from blaming. It was blaming at the start. I was like everybody else. This is somebody else's fault, not mine. And it became very honest and brutally honest, I suppose, as it went through. Um, Journaling is something that I have done on and off. I have found it beneficial. I have found it difficult to maintain for long periods of time. I tend to journal now when I have the thought rather than it being a practice. So I have a journal that I keep with me. And if I have a thought that needs to be journaled, I journal it. But I personally don't have a practice where I do it in the evenings or I do it in the mornings. I have some clients that do. It's one of a suite of tools that I will encourage people to try. But again, ultimately, I think people have to be honest with themselves, but they have to find the tasks and the tools that will work for them or that they will do repeatedly. Because, my view is that journaling is a great tool. But just like a diet, if you don't do it, it doesn't work. And so
And
you have to
journaling,
find the tool that you will do.
yeah, and I find journaling comes in all shapes and forms, right? So journaling is not just writing in a journal. It can be actually having a conversation and having some deep
Yep.
reflection and kind of communicating that. It can be, running your own podcast or, like you've journaled today by telling your story, right? There'll be things after this that you'll go back and go, yeah, you'll be thinking about a little bit more. I interviewed another gentleman recently about his gambling addiction. And there was a couple of times in it where he actually teared up and he said to me, okay, I'm going to go and journal on that. I've got to go and unlock because why did I get emotional on that? There's something there that I need to kind of dig into and get out. So some people, I had a gentleman that said to me that I was working with and he says, oh, I don't like writing. I said, do you like talking? And he's like, oh yeah, I can talk. I said, well, do voice to text, do voice recorder, whatever it is, right? Just do something that gets it out of your brain, gets it out of you internally to externally, because you will then reflect on that and you will learn from that, So when we say journaling, a lot of people think, well, journaling's writing in a journal. And look, I've probably lost count of the amount of journals, I'll go on an overseas trip, I'll go to the news agency there and I'll buy a journal. We all do it, right? Like, and then, actually, I need the right type of journal that looks perfect. And I need one that's the right color and the right size. And this one, I don't like the paper in it. And actually, I need a really good pen to journal with as well, right? Like, these are all the things that go through. And I know
I
a
didn't
lot
write
of
for a
people
month.
have,
I better buy a new journal so
yeah,
nobody knows I
yeah,
didn't write for a
yeah,
month.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like we have these stories that we just continue to keep telling ourselves. It is absolutely crazy. Gary, has there been a book or a resource that has had a big impact on your journey?
Look, probably a few resources. I've got to admit that reading is not something that I've done a hell of a lot of books wise. I tend to listen or watch a lot of my content, I suppose, podcasts in particular. Um, and probably short journals. I do research, so I read short articles, that sort of thing. However, there's probably been a few things, directions in terms of books. There's no doubt that Marcus Aurelius's Meditations has had a big effect on me. It is one of the books that I've actually read cover to cover. Um, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning was very
Great book.
was something that really had a big impact on me at the right time. A lot of authors that I've read some of their works, but also watched them in talks and speaking on, like Ryan Holiday with the Daily Stoic, James Clear's Atomic Habits and other, similar types of stuff. I much prefer to listen to the person talk than I do to read their books, to be fair. But
I'm with you. I'm with you on
again,
that. I
I'm
prefer
a,
to
I, you
listen
know,
to an
I'm a,
audio book, especially when they read it themselves,
yeah,
because it's easy to
yeah.
just connect. It's like listening to a podcast.
Yeah, it's why I enjoy the interviews. I like to hear the person talk. I like to hear them, express the important parts of their works, but where they came from as well. And
Mm.
I needed help. And somebody that gambles $2 million doesn't have a lot of money to pay for coaches or mentors. So my early mentors in this process were literally YouTube podcasts, and I found Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu, interviewed Tony Robbins. He
Mm.
then interviewed Ed Milet, and I was fortunate enough to do a little bit of work in some of Ed's groups later on. But Ed Milet's podcast really opened my eyes. They interview Joe Dispenza. That started me down a neuroscience path. David Goggins, certainly down that path of action. And these days, Andrew Huberman's podcast, I do neuroscience and psychology, and Chris Williamson's podcast, but again, more for the guests they have on. And my life these days is more about listening to conversations with a view of what can I learn from this person, irrespective of what the topic is, irrespective of what their political views are. And I find that with that perspective, I get to learn a hell of a lot more about myself and my own journey. So again, those two books in particular, but certainly podcasts were YouTube and podcasts were my best friend when I had nothing.
Yeah, and they're free, right? Anyone can
Yeah.
listen to them. It's
Yeah,
brilliant.
there's been no other time in history where you can get taught by somebody who actually costs $1 million for a one-on-one session. Right?
Yeah.
You pretty much get their lessons for free if you're willing to do the time, if you're willing to do the looking, if you're willing to be again vulnerable with yourself to say, hey, I need to get something out of this, and actually look for something out of it that you can take, and then put it into practice. Right? It's nothing works unless you do. You've got to do the work, right? But there are great resources for anybody out there that may not be able to afford them or don't know what they're looking for. You can certainly search around, find a couple of podcasts you like, find some coaches in that field that you like. And I'll tell you what, I don't think it matters what you like these days. There's got to be somebody out there that you can resonate with.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting as human beings, though, isn't it? It's like, people say, oh, I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have, I can't afford a gym membership or all these different things, right? We can come up with all the excuses. It's the brain, right? Like, you say to people, oh, you don't have time to go to the gym. Oh, okay, cool. What Netflix series are you watching at the moment? Oh, yeah, I just binge watched, 10 hours of whatever it was, right? And there is access out there for everyone in regards to, if you want to exercise, well, you can walk. Like if the weather's not great outside, well, you can exercise inside, right? There's multiple opportunities. You can look at the problems, or you can just look for the solutions.
Yeah, and again, people have conditioned themselves a particular way over a number of years, and I've said a lot about my depression period and even my addiction period that depression is easy, and I have to qualify that by saying it's not pleasant, but it's easy because you don't have to do anything. And when you have depression or when you have anxiety or when you have an addiction, it's easy to say to yourself, well, I can't be successful because I have depression. So I might as well just sit here and what does it matter if I exercise, or what does it matter if I eat this thing? And to be fair, it's hard, right? It's hard to change. It's hard to make the sacrifices that are required. It's why it's important, I think, for people to really do a very strong exercise on trying to understand who they are and the things that they value, and using that as a blueprint for what you want to do with your life. If you can't be that person right now, create an image of what the best version of you looks like, and then ask yourself what that person would do every day, and try and do one or two of those things, right? If you do one or two of those things every day, pretty soon you'll do 3 or 4 of those things and 4 or 5 of those things, and then you become that person, right? So if you don't have the capability yourself right now, just spend an hour or two to try and create an image of the best version of yourself that you could become, that you could be in 6 months or 12 months or 5 years. And just pick 1 or 2 things that person would do. And just do that, but don't stop. The key is not stopping. It's keeping the promises to yourself. And, again, the thing itself might be immaterial, but, if the thing is exercising every day, then exercise every day. Whether it's a 10-minute walk or a 1 hour bloody, HIIT class that's going to destroy you. It doesn't really matter. If your promise is to promise, then do the thing.
Yeah, that's great. Now, through that, Gary, through your life, obviously you've touched on it a little bit, but talk to me about what success meant to you and what it means to you today.
In reality, in the past, I had no clue what success meant to me. I was taking cues from the external world, what my my parents and family valued, what my school report said about me, what I saw in other successful people, getting promoted and being asked to do these jobs and having this money, and the things that we see on Instagram now. And, all of my ideas of success in the past were externally driven with zero or next to zero conscious thought, right? It was really just subconsciously conditioned that this is what success was. And for most people, if I say to somebody that, what does success look like? They will either picture an elite athlete or somebody with a hell of a lot of money. That's almost it, or a celebrity, right? A celebrity or someone with a lot of money, right? And that's how we've kind of conditioned ourselves to think success is. I don't know, my post come to Jesus moment life. To me, success is about living as close as possible to the person that I was meant to be. The conscious identity that I've done the work to understand. This is who I am when my emotions can't get in the way. The best version of me is a guy who lives a life of purpose, of growth, gratitude, discipline, service, and presence. And the closer I can be to that, the more successful I feel. Now, that doesn't come with a dollar sign. That doesn't come with a front page, expose or a front page story or, any of that sort of stuff. It may do for some people, right? And it may do for me, but success to me is living as close as possible to the person that you were designed to be. And you get the luxury of designing that consciously and compelling version of yourself.
Yeah, excellent. And who would you say throughout your life has been your greatest teacher, Gary?
For life has probably been my greatest teacher. I'm not entirely sure. There's been one. Look, I think the longer I live, the more I learn that there isn't just one. That the more I look around, there's been, again, the people from those early podcasts. If they didn't exist, then I wouldn't be here today. People from my past life, there was people I aspired to be like. There's been athletes that I've wanted to be like. Certainly my parents, my father has been a very strong influence, work ethic and family orientated and honest, and loyal, and all of these great qualities. But I think it would be naive of me to think that I've had a greatest teacher, as opposed to a very long series of great teachers that I've been able to take bits and pieces from, to get to where I am and hopefully where I'm going to.
Yeah. Now, with the work that you do on mindset, the journey that you've come through, if you could instill a message into our listeners, just one message, what would that be for for what you'd want them to remember from this episode?
I will somehow flow two together, and that is to be brutally honest with yourself and create a clear, compelling, and conscious identity and vision of the future. If you can create that, then you have the opportunity to live into it. In the absence of a conscious identity, we all become a victim of circumstance, a victim of conditioning, and a victim of comfort. So if you do nothing else, it's create a conscious identity and do your very best to live that out.
Perfect. Awesome advice. Now, Gary, for those that want to connect with you, that want to reach out, obviously I know you do some keynote speaking, you do some coaching. What's the best way for people to reach out to you and connect?
GaryFahey.com will find me. Gary Fahey on LinkedIn is probably the best places to. I don't do a hell of a lot of social media these days, but they're probably the two best places. If you Google me, thankfully, if you Googled me 5 years ago, there are a lot of bad stories. There's a few nicer ones now, but if you Google me, you'll probably find me as well. So if my name stays up on the screen, you type it in, you're probably going to get me first, or GaryFahey.com, and there'll be a way to contact me there.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. And we'll put that in the show reel notes as well when this episode comes out. I've loved your story, Gary. I love the work that you do, the power in the vulnerability, and kind of telling your story, and also helping other people, those that have listened here, and the people that you kind of speak to and coach. Helping them to kind of find their genuine self, their authentic self, and live how they were meant to live how they were meant to live. and the life that they were meant to live. So very grateful for your time. Look forward to connecting and continuing to stay in touch. And, just as you are and as I are and a lot of the guys and girls are doing, is really pushing that mental health and making sure people don't feel alone.
I appreciate that, Steve, and I appreciate the work you do. I appreciate you having me on and having the ability to share, stories and real stories and stories of struggle. But stories of struggle are often stories of success as well. And sharing those, I greatly appreciate. Again, you having me on and what you do in that space, and maybe we'll catch up soon in the cold plunge.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, mate.